General Marcus Thompson had seen it all during his 30-year military career. From the dusty battlefields of Afghanistan to the polished corridors of the Pentagon, he thought he knew every type of soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine that walked through those doors. But on this particular Tuesday morning in 2019, something would challenge everything he believed he knew about military service and the people who dedicate their lives to protecting their country. The recruitment fair at Fort Bragg was bustling with activity. Hundreds of young men and women moved between booths, their eyes bright with dreams of serving their nation. General Thompson walked through the crowds, observing the interactions between recruiters and potential enlistees. He had volunteered to attend these events whenever possible, believing that seeing senior leadership made a difference in inspiring the next generation of warriors. As he approached the Special Operations booth, he noticed a commotion. A group of Navy SEAL recruiters had gathered around someone, their voices animated with excitement. The crowd was thick, making it impossible for him to see who had captured their attention so completely. The general's curiosity was piqued. In his experience, SEALs were not easily impressed by anyone, especially not at a recruitment fair, where most attendees were civilians with no military experience whatsoever. He pushed through the crowd politely, using his rank and presence to create a path without being forceful. As he got closer, he could hear fragments of conversation that made his eyebrows furrow with confusion. The SEALs were using technical jargon that even he, with all his experience, had to strain to follow. They were discussing underwater demolition techniques, advanced combat swimming protocols, and mission planning strategies that were typically reserved for classified briefings. When General Thompson finally reached the center of the gathering, he stopped dead in his tracks. Standing in the middle of the circle was not the grizzled veteran he had expected, but a young woman who couldn't have been more than 22 years old. She was petite, maybe 5 feet 4 inches tall, with long auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, a simple white t-shirt, and sneakers that had seen better days. What struck him most was not her appearance, but her demeanor. While everyone else seemed excited and animated, she remained calm and composed. Her posture was relaxed yet alert, and when she spoke, her voice carried a quiet confidence that commanded attention. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply answering questions with the kind of detailed knowledge that came from real experience, not textbook study. The woman was explaining something about underwater navigation using only natural landmarks when one of the SEAL instructors decided to test her knowledge further. Without warning, he made a quick, subtle hand gesture, barely visible to most observers. It was a specialized tactical signal used in underwater operations, something that was taught only in the most advanced SEAL training programs. General Thompson knew the signal. He had learned it during his own brief stint with Special Operations early in his career, back when he was young and hungry for the most challenging assignments the military could offer. The gesture was so specialized that outside of active SEALs and a handful of other Special Operations personnel, virtually no one would recognize it, let alone know how to respond appropriately. The young woman's response was instantaneous and perfect. Without hesitation, she made the corresponding acknowledgement signal, then followed it with 2 additional gestures that indicated she understood not just the basic command, but was ready to receive more complex instructions. The precision and speed of her response sent a ripple of shocked silence through the gathered SEALs. General Thompson felt his own jaw drop slightly. He had trained with these men, had seen their rigorous selection process, and knew that what he had just witnessed was impossible. The hand signals she had used were not publicly available information. They were not taught in any civilian diving course or military appreciation program. They were learned through months of grueling training in some of the most challenging conditions imaginable. One of the senior SEALs, a master chief with over 20 years of experience, stepped forward. His face showed a mixture of disbelief and growing respect. He asked her directly where she had learned those signals, his tone suggesting he was not entirely sure he believed what he had just seen. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and everyone present seemed to hold their breath waiting for her answer. The young woman smiled for the first time since General Thompson had been watching her. It was a small, knowing smile that suggested she was used to this kind of reaction. She looked around at the faces surrounding her, taking in their expressions of curiosity and doubt, before speaking in that same calm, confident voice that had first caught the general's attention. Her words would change everything everyone thought they knew about her, and would begin a story that would challenge assumptions about service, sacrifice, and the true meaning of being a warrior. As General Thompson stood there, waiting to hear what she would say next, he realized that this recruitment fair was about to become much more interesting than he had anticipated. Sarah Mitchell took a deep breath before answering the Master Chief's question. She had been through this before, though never quite so publicly or with such a distinguished audience. The skeptical faces surrounding her were familiar territory. People often struggled to reconcile her appearance with her background, and she had learned long ago that the best approach was simply to tell the truth and let the facts speak for themselves. "I learned those signals during my service with SEAL Team 6, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the weight of the revelation. "I completed BUDS training in 2016 and served for 3 years before my medical discharge last year." The silence that followed her words was deafening. General Thompson found himself studying her face more carefully, looking for any sign of deception or exaggeration. But her expression remained calm and matter-of-fact, as if she had simply mentioned the weather, rather than claiming to be one of the most elite warriors in the American military. The Master Chief's eyes widened noticeably. He took a step closer, his skepticism now mixed with genuine curiosity and something that might have been recognition. "Mitchell, Sarah Mitchell," he asked slowly, as if testing the name on his tongue. "You're the one they called Ghost during that operation in Somalia?" Sarah nodded once, a brief acknowledgement that carried the weight of shared experience and understanding. Around them, the other SEALs began to murmur among themselves, and General Thompson caught fragments of conversation that mentioned classified operations and commendations. It was becoming clear that this young woman was not just any former SEAL, but someone who had made a significant impact during her relatively short time in service. General Thompson felt compelled to step forward. His rank and position had always afforded him access to information that others didn't have, and he was beginning to remember briefings about extraordinary operations conducted by SEAL teams in recent years. There had been reports of a female operator who had achieved remarkable success in situations where male SEALs couldn't effectively operate, particularly in regions where cultural restrictions would have made their presence impossible or counterproductive. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his rank while maintaining respect for her service, "I believe I may have read some after-action reports that mentioned your work. If you're who I think you are, then you've done some truly exceptional things for this country." Sarah turned to face him, and for the first time, General Thompson saw something flicker in her eyes. It was a brief moment of vulnerability, quickly masked but unmistakably present. He realized that behind her composed exterior was someone who had seen and done things that most people couldn't imagine, and who was now trying to find her place in a world that didn't quite know how to recognize or accommodate her unique experience. "I did my job," she replied simply, "same as anyone else who's worn the uniform." But the Master Chief shook his head emphatically. "No, that's not the same at all," he said, his voice filled with a respect that was earned rather than given. "What you did in Mogadishu? That wasn't just doing your job. That was extraordinary by any standard." General Thompson's memory suddenly clicked into place. He remembered now the classified briefing about a hostage rescue operation that had seemed impossible until a female SEAL had volunteered for a mission that no male operator could have accomplished. The details were still classified, but the basic facts were that she had infiltrated a heavily guarded compound by posing as a local woman, gathered critical intelligence, and then provided tactical support that allowed the rescue team to extract 3 American contractors who had been held captive for months. The operation had been so successful and so unusual that it had been studied at the highest levels of military leadership. What made it even more remarkable was that the female SEAL who had made it possible had volunteered for the mission knowing that if she were captured, the enemy would show her no mercy. She had walked into a situation where discovery meant certain death, and she had done it without hesitation. "You were the one who got our people out of that compound," General Thompson said, not really asking a question but confirming what he now knew to be true. The intelligence community was talking about that operation for months. They said it couldn't have been done any other way. Sarah's composure remained steady, but those who knew what to look for could see the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested the memory was not an easy one. "We got them home," she said. "That's what mattered." The crowd around them had grown larger as word spread through the recruitment fair that someone extraordinary was present. Other military personnel, both active duty and veterans, had begun to gather, drawn by the unusual scene of a general and multiple SEALs in intense conversation with a young civilian woman. One of the younger SEALs, clearly struggling to process what he was hearing, asked the question that was on many minds. "But how are you here at a recruitment fair? If you're Sarah Mitchell, if you're really Ghost, then why aren't you still serving? Why are you here talking to recruiters like you're trying to enlist?" The question hung in the air, and General Thompson saw something shift in Sarah's expression. The calm composure remained, but underneath it, he could sense a deeper story waiting to be told. He realized that whatever had brought her to this recruitment fair, whatever had ended her career with the SEALs, was probably as remarkable as the service that had preceded it. Sarah's hand unconsciously moved to her left shoulder, a gesture so subtle that only someone with extensive medical or combat experience would have recognized it as significant. General Thompson noticed immediately, his trained eye catching the slight favor she gave to her right side and the careful way she held herself to minimize strain on what was obviously an injury. "I'm here because my service with the teams ended differently than I had planned," Sarah said, her voice maintaining its steady tone despite the personal nature of the revelation. "During a training exercise last year, there was an accident. A helicopter crashed during a night insertion training mission. 3 of us were injured, and while my teammates recovered fully, my shoulder and back injuries were severe enough that I no longer met the physical requirements for SEAL operations." The Master Chief nodded solemnly. He had seen too many good operators forced out of service by injuries sustained in the line of duty. It was one of the harsh realities of special operations. The physical demands were so extreme that even minor injuries could end careers that had taken years to build and represented sacrifices that civilians could barely comprehend. General Thompson felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Throughout his career, he had witnessed countless examples of dedicated service members whose time in uniform had been cut short by circumstances beyond their control. But there was something particularly poignant about this situation. Here was someone who had reached the absolute pinnacle of military service, who had proven herself in the most demanding circumstances imaginable, only to have it all taken away by a training accident. "The medical board was very thorough," Sarah continued. "I went through months of physical therapy, consulted with specialists across the country, and pushed my recovery harder than the doctors recommended. But ultimately, the damage to my rotator cuff and the nerve damage in my back meant that I couldn't perform at the level required for special operations. The Navy offered me opportunities in other roles, but..." She paused, and for the first time, General Thompson heard something approaching emotion in her voice. It was carefully controlled, but it was there. A hint of the frustration and loss that must have accompanied the end of what had clearly been not just a career, but a calling. "But it wouldn't have been the same," she finished. "The teams were where I belonged, where I could make the biggest difference. If I couldn't do that anymore, then I needed to find a different way to serve." One of the younger SEALs stepped forward, his expression showing the kind of respect that was reserved for those who had proven themselves under the most extreme circumstances. "So what brings you here today? Are you looking to get back in, maybe with a different branch?" Sarah smiled slightly, and General Thompson noticed that it was the first genuine smile he had seen from her since the conversation began. "Actually, I'm not here as a potential recruit," she said. "I'm here as a consultant. I've been working with the Department of Defense on developing new training protocols for female candidates who want to attempt special operations programs." The revelation sent another ripple of surprise through the gathered crowd. General Thompson found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about the situation. This wasn't a story about someone trying to recapture past glory or struggling to find their place after military service. This was about someone who had taken their unique experience and expertise and found a way to continue serving, even when traditional paths were no longer available. "The military is changing," Sarah continued, her voice taking on a note of passion that hadn't been present before. "We're recognizing that there are missions and situations where female operators can be more effective than their male counterparts, not because they're better or worse, but because they bring different capabilities to the table. What I learned during my time with the teams, both about the training process and about operational effectiveness, is valuable for developing programs that can identify and prepare other women who have the potential to serve in these roles. General Thompson nodded thoughtfully. He had been involved in high-level discussions about exactly these issues. The military's recognition that diversity in special operations could enhance effectiveness, rather than compromise it, was relatively recent, and finding people with the right combination of experience and insight to help develop new approaches was challenging. "The hand signals you demonstrated," the Master Chief said, understanding beginning to dawn on his face. "You were testing our training protocols, weren't you? Seeing how we respond to candidates who already have advanced knowledge?" Sarah's smile widened slightly. "Partly," she admitted, "but also I wanted to see if the culture has changed enough to accept that someone who looks like me might have the background to make those signals meaningful. Based on the reaction I got, I'd say we still have some work to do in terms of managing assumptions and biases." General Thompson realized that he had just witnessed something much more complex than a chance encounter at a recruitment fair. This had been a deliberate test, conducted by someone who understood military culture well enough to predict exactly how the scenario would unfold. Sarah Mitchell hadn't stumbled into this situation. She had orchestrated it as a way to gather real-world data about how military personnel responded to unexpected demonstrations of expertise from unconventional sources. The gathering crowd had grown silent, absorbing the implications of what they had just learned. Here was someone who had not only succeeded in one of the military's most demanding roles but was now working to expand opportunities for others while simultaneously challenging the assumptions and biases that might prevent the military from recognizing talent when it appeared in unexpected forms. "So what happens next?" asked one of the SEALs. "What does your research tell you about the future of special operations training?" Sarah's answer would reveal the broader implications of her work and the vision she had for the future of military service. Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her, taking a moment to consider her words carefully. What she was about to share represented months of research, analysis, and careful observation, but more importantly, it reflected her vision for how the military could become more effective by embracing capabilities that had previously been overlooked or undervalued. "What I've learned," she began, "is that our current assessment methods are missing a lot of potential. We're so focused on traditional indicators of capability that we sometimes fail to recognize unconventional strengths. The hand signal demonstration wasn't just about testing your assumptions about me. It was about understanding how we evaluate knowledge and experience in general." General Thompson leaned forward slightly, intrigued by the direction of her analysis. In his years of military service, he had seen countless examples of talented individuals who didn't fit traditional molds being passed over or underestimated. The idea that someone was systematically studying these patterns and developing solutions was both fascinating and long overdue. "Take the young woman who was standing behind you when I first started talking," Sarah continued, nodding toward a petite blonde woman in her early 20s who had been quietly observing the entire exchange. "She's been listening to everything we've discussed, and I noticed her making small corrections to her posture and hand positioning based on the tactical signals she observed. That level of rapid learning and adaptation is exactly the kind of trait that predicts success in special operations, but it's not something we typically test for in recruitment." The young woman Sarah had indicated stepped forward, her cheeks coloring slightly at suddenly being the center of attention. "I'm sorry," she said hesitantly. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I'm actually here trying to decide between different service options, and this conversation has been really educational." Sarah smiled encouragingly. "What's your background? Any military experience in your family?" "My father was a Marine, and my brother is currently deployed with an Army Ranger unit," the young woman replied. "I grew up around military culture, but I've never served myself. I'm finishing my degree in mechanical engineering, and I've been considering different ways I might be able to contribute." General Thompson watched the interaction with growing interest. He could see Sarah's analytical mind working, processing information and drawing connections that weren't immediately obvious to others. It reminded him of the best intelligence analysts he had worked with, people who could see patterns and possibilities that others missed. "What kind of physical training do you do?" Sarah asked, her tone suggesting she already suspected the answer would be significant. I compete in triathlons and rock climbing competitions, the young woman answered. I've also been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for about 6 years. My coach says I have good spatial awareness and problem-solving skills under pressure. Sarah nodded, and General Thompson could see her making mental notes. Those are exactly the kinds of skills that translate well to special operations training, but they're not necessarily captured by our standard fitness assessments or academic requirements. The combination of endurance training, technical problem-solving, under stress and combat sports experience creates a foundation that's incredibly valuable. The Master Chief looked between Sarah and the young woman, understanding beginning to dawn on his face. You're saying we might be missing potential candidates because we're not looking for the right indicators? Exactly, Sarah replied. And it goes beyond just physical capabilities. During my time with the teams, some of our most successful operations involve skills that aren't traditionally associated with special operations training. Language abilities, cultural understanding, technical expertise in unexpected areas. These things can make the difference between mission success and failure. General Thompson found himself thinking about his own experiences in various command positions. How many times had he seen operations succeed because of the unique background or perspective of a single team member? How many talented individuals had he encountered who possessed valuable skills but had been overlooked because they didn't fit expected profiles? So what are you proposing? He asked. How do we change recruitment and assessment to identify these unconventional strengths? Sarah's expression became more animated as she moved into what was clearly familiar territory for her. I'm working with a team of psychologists, military, trainers, and data analysts to develop new assessment protocols. Instead of just measuring against established benchmarks, we're creating scenarios that reveal adaptive thinking, cultural sensitivity, technical aptitude, and stress management in ways that traditional testing can't capture. She gestured toward the recruitment fair happening around them. Events like this are perfect laboratories for understanding how people interact with military culture and how they process information under pressure. The young woman here demonstrated several indicators of special operations potential just in the way she observed and absorbed our conversation. The young woman looked surprised and slightly overwhelmed. Are you saying I should consider special operations training? She asked. I'm saying you should consider what kind of service would best utilize your unique combination of skills and interests, Sarah replied. Special operations is just one possibility, but there are many ways to serve that might benefit from your particular background and capabilities. General Thompson realized that what he was witnessing was more than just an interesting encounter at a recruitment fair. This was a demonstration of a fundamentally different approach to talent identification and development. Instead of trying to fit people into existing molds, Sarah was proposing that the military adapt its methods to recognize and cultivate diverse forms of excellence. The resistance you'll face, he said thoughtfully, won't just be about changing procedures, it'll be about changing mindsets that have been in place for generations. Sarah nodded seriously. I know. That's why this kind of field research is so important. We need to demonstrate that these new approaches actually work, that they identify people who go on to succeed in ways that traditional methods might have missed. We need proof that diversity of background and perspective enhances rather than compromises operational effectiveness. The conversation was attracting attention from throughout the recruitment fair, and General Thompson could see senior personnel from various branches beginning to take notice. What had started as a simple demonstration of unexpected knowledge was evolving into something much more significant, a real-time illustration of how military talent identification could be transformed. As word spread throughout the recruitment fair about the extraordinary conversation taking place at the Special Operations booth, senior officers from all branches began to converge on the area. General Thompson recognized several colleagues among the approaching group, including Admiral Rebecca Chen from Naval Special Warfare Command and Colonel James Rodriguez from Army Special Operations. Sarah noticed the gathering crowd but didn't seem intimidated by the increased attention. If anything, she appeared to welcome the opportunity to share her research with a broader audience of decision-makers. General Thompson realized that this moment represented exactly the kind of high-level engagement that could transform theoretical research into practical policy changes. Ms. Mitchell, Admiral Chen said as she approached, I've been following your consulting work with great interest. The preliminary reports I've seen suggest some fascinating insights about recruitment and training effectiveness. Sarah nodded respectfully. Admiral, thank you for your support of the research project. What we're discovering is that talent exists in many forms, and our challenge is creating assessment methods sophisticated enough to recognize it, regardless of how it's packaged. Colonel Rodriguez stepped forward, his expression showing both curiosity and skepticism. I've heard about your theoretical models, but I'm more interested in practical applications. How do you propose we implement these new assessment methods without compromising the standards that have made our special operations forces the most effective in the world? It was a fair question, and General Thompson could see that Sarah had anticipated it. Her response would need to address legitimate concerns about maintaining excellence while expanding opportunity. The goal isn't to lower standards, Sarah replied firmly. It's to ensure that our standards are actually measuring what matters for mission success. During my time with SEAL Team 6, I saw operations succeed because team members brought capabilities that weren't reflected in their initial assessment scores. Conversely, I saw some individuals who had excelled in traditional metrics struggle in real-world situations that required different kinds of thinking. She gestured toward the young woman who was still standing nearby, listening intently to the conversation. Take this potential candidate. Her background combines endurance athletics, technical engineering training, combat sports experience, and exposure to military culture. Traditional recruitment might focus primarily on her physical fitness scores and academic credentials, but miss the fact that her rock climbing experience has developed exceptional risk assessment skills, and her jiu-jitsu training has created comfort with physical confrontation and close quarters. Problem solving. Admiral Chen nodded thoughtfully. And you're suggesting these unconventional indicators might actually be better predictors of special operations success? I'm suggesting they should be part of a more comprehensive evaluation process, Sarah clarified. We're not abandoning traditional metrics. We're expanding them to create a more complete picture of each candidate's potential. General Thompson found himself thinking about his own career path and the various factors that had contributed to his success. How much of his effectiveness as a leader had come from experiences and perspectives that weren't captured in his initial military assessments? How many potentially outstanding officers and enlisted personnel had been overlooked because their strengths weren't recognized by conventional evaluation methods? The young woman Sarah had used as an example spoke up hesitantly. If I may ask, what would this new assessment process actually look like? How would it be different from current recruitment? Sarah's expression lit up with enthusiasm. That's an excellent question. Instead of just physical fitness tests and interviews, we might include scenario-based evaluations that test adaptive thinking under pressure. We might assess cultural intelligence and communication skills in ways that reveal how someone might perform in complex operational environments. We might evaluate technical problem-solving using real-world challenges rather than just academic exercises. Colonel Rodriguez looked intrigued despite his initial skepticism. Are you talking about something like a comprehensive simulation? Multiple days of testing that recreate the complexity of actual operations? Exactly, Sarah replied, but designed to reveal potential rather than just current capability. Someone who has never been exposed to military training obviously won't perform like an experienced operator, but they might demonstrate the underlying qualities that predict they could become an exceptional operator with proper development. General Thompson realized that what Sarah was describing represented a fundamental shift in how the military thought about human potential. Instead of trying to identify people who already possessed specific skills, the focus would be on recognizing individuals who had the foundational qualities necessary to develop those skills at the highest level. The other crucial element, Sarah continued, is understanding that different missions require different combinations of capabilities. A hostage rescue operation in an urban environment might benefit from team members with different backgrounds than a reconnaissance mission in a rural area. If we can better understand and predict these requirements, we can build more effective teams by selecting for complementary rather than identical strengths. Admiral Chen exchanged glances with her colleagues. This kind of research could have implications far beyond special operations recruitment. If these methods prove effective, they could transform how we approach talent management across all military specialties. That's exactly what we're hoping, Sarah agreed. Special operations represents the most demanding application, so if new assessment methods work at that level, they should be even more effective for other roles and responsibilities. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a senior enlisted SEAL who had been observing from the periphery. Master Chief Petty Officer Williams approached the group with the confident bearing of someone who had earned respect through decades of exceptional service. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said to Sarah, "but I wanted to share something that might be relevant to your research. I've been listening to this conversation, and it reminds me of something that happened during a deployment last year." General Thompson could see that Sarah was immediately interested in hearing what the Master Chief had to say. Real-world examples and operational experiences were exactly the kind of data that could validate or challenge theoretical models. "Please, Master Chief," Sarah said. "I'd very much like to hear about your experience." Master Chief Williams cleared his throat and looked around at the distinguished group that had gathered. His weathered face showed the kind of serious expression that came with years of making life-and-death decisions in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. "Last year, we had a situation in Southeast Asia where traditional approaches weren't working," he began. "We needed to gather intelligence in an area where any obvious military presence would have compromised the mission. The local culture meant that male operators would have limited access to certain areas and populations." General Thompson noticed that Sarah was listening with particular intensity, clearly recognizing parallels to her own operational experiences. "We ended up partnering with a female CIA operative who had an unconventional background," the Master Chief continued. "She had been a professional dancer before joining the agency, had studied anthropology in graduate school, and spoke 3 local languages fluently. On paper, she didn't look like someone who would be effective in a high-risk intelligence-gathering operation." Admiral Chen leaned forward slightly. "But she was successful?" "More than successful," Master Chief Williams replied. "Her cultural understanding and ability to blend into local social situations gave us access to information that we never could have obtained through conventional methods. But what really impressed me was how she adapted to the tactical requirements of the mission. She learned our communication protocols, understood operational security requirements, and demonstrated situational awareness that most people take years to develop." Sarah nodded knowingly. Did her success surprise the team members who had initially been skeptical about working with someone from outside traditional special operations? "Absolutely," the Master Chief admitted. "But it also made us think differently about what kinds of backgrounds and experiences might be valuable for future operations." "That's why what you're saying today resonates with me. We might be missing potential team members because we're not looking for the right combinations of skills and qualities." General Thompson realized that this real-world example perfectly illustrated the points Sarah had been making throughout their conversation. Here was concrete evidence that unconventional backgrounds could contribute to mission success in ways that traditional assessment methods might not predict. The young woman who had been part of the conversation from the beginning spoke up again. "This is all fascinating, but I have to ask, if I were interested in pursuing special operations training, what would you recommend as next steps?" Sarah smiled at her. "First, I'd suggest you continue developing the skills you already have, while beginning to explore military service options. Your engineering background, athletic training, and martial arts experience are all valuable foundations. But equally important is developing your understanding of military culture and operations." Colonel Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "That's sound advice. Too many people think special operations training starts with the selection process, but really it begins with years of preparation and development. I'd also recommend," Admiral Chen added, "that you consider spending time with veterans and active duty personnel to understand the realities of military service. The romance and excitement that people see in movies is very different from the actual demands and sacrifices involved." General Thompson found himself reflecting on the entire conversation and what it represented. What had started as a simple demonstration of unexpected knowledge had evolved into a comprehensive discussion about talent identification, military effectiveness, and the future of special operations. More importantly, it had brought together senior leaders from different branches to consider new approaches to old challenges. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, "I think what you've demonstrated here today goes beyond just research methodology. You've shown how the right person in the right situation can challenge assumptions, facilitate important conversations, and create opportunities for institutional learning and growth. Sarah looked around at the group that had assembled, taking in the faces of seasoned military leaders who were genuinely engaged with ideas that could transform how their organizations operated. "That's exactly what I was hoping for," she said. "Real change happens when experienced practitioners are willing to examine their methods and consider new possibilities." The Master Chief spoke up one final time. "What strikes me most about this whole conversation is that it started with a simple hand signal, but it's really about recognition and respect. Recognizing talent wherever it exists, and respecting the idea that excellence can come in many different forms." As the formal recruitment fair continued around them, the group began to disperse, but not before exchanging contact information and making commitments to continue the conversation in more formal settings. General Thompson realized that Sarah Mitchell had accomplished something remarkable. She had used her unique position as someone who had succeeded at the highest levels of military service to create space for broader discussions about how that success could be identified and cultivated in others. The young woman who had sparked much of the discussion approached Sarah one last time. "Thank you for including me in this conversation," she said. "It's given me a lot to think about regarding how I might want to serve." Sarah shook her hand warmly. "Remember, there are many ways to serve, and the best choice is the one that allows you to contribute your unique strengths to something larger than yourself. Whether that's special operations, conventional military service, or civilian roles that support national security, what matters is finding where you can make the biggest difference." As General Thompson walked away from the recruitment fair later that afternoon, he carried with him a renewed appreciation for the complexity of human potential and the importance of remaining open to unexpected sources of excellence. The encounter with Sarah Mitchell had reminded him that the most powerful tool any organization possessed was its willingness to recognize and develop talent, regardless of how unconventional that talent might initially appear. The hand signal that had started everything was just the beginning. The real message was about the value of looking beyond surface appearances to find the extraordinary capabilities that existed in unexpected places, waiting for the right opportunity to contribute to something meaningful and important.